Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine English, right? The language you're hearing now, spoken all over the world. Imagine it being seen as, well, crude. Yeah, like, only fit for peasants. Sounds pretty bizarre, I know, but for hundreds of years, that was the actual reality in England itself.
It really is a powerful way to think about it, isn't it? It just shows how the status of a language, whether we think it's sophisticated or crude, it's not like inherent in the language itself. It's completely tied to the power, the prestige, the social standing of the people speaking it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Last time, we took a deep dive into those long, sometimes surprisingly close links between England and France before 1066. Royal marriages, cultural stuff woven together, deep connection.
You're right, things are intertwined.
But then, like often happens, bam, one huge event changed everything.
And that's exactly what we're digging into this time. Our mission today, based on the sources you sent over, is to figure out precisely how English got sidelined, how it became this, well, common tongue, and to explore just how much language became tied up with social class during that whole period. It was incredibly transformative. We're looking at who had the power and, who got to decide which language mattered.
Right. So the earthquake event, the big one that caused this massive language shift.
That would be the Norman Conquest. 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, sailed across the Channel, wins the Battle of Hastings, becomes William the Conqueror, King of England.
And the sources really emphasize how big a deal this was. It's kind of amazing to think it was England's last successful foreign invasion by force.
It is remarkable. And the immediate, the number one consequence for language was switching out Anglo-Saxon, what we call Old English for Norman French, as the official language, period.
Wow, just like that.
Pretty much at the top levels. That single event is really seen as the major dividing line. It marks the big shift from Old English over to Middle English. If it wasn't some slow, gradual thing, it was a very sudden, imposed change right from the new king down.
And this wasn't just, changing the language on official documents. This conquest didn't just swap kings. It put in a whole new ruling class.
Exactly.
And they brought their language, French, and set up this really rigid social structure where your language basically told everyone your rank.
Precisely. A very clear, almost instant language hierarchy got set up under Norman rule. Norman French wasn't just the king's language, it was the language of the entire power base.
Okay.
We're talking the new nobles, mostly Normans who got land taken from the old English aristocracy. It was the language of government, the administration, the law courts.
All of it.
From top to bottom. The army leaders, and this is key, it became the language for formal education too. Think grammar schools, training up clerks and future officials. The sources show French just soaked into every part of authority and privilege.
So then English.
Yeah.
The language most people actually spoke, where did it end up?
Pushed right to the bottom. The sources are really explicit here. English was seen as, lower class. Terms like crude, vulgar, rustic get used. Yeah. Fit only for the lowest levels of society. Farmers, laborers, ordinary folk. And apparently, even many lower-class Normans who came over after the conquest kept speaking French among themselves. It reinforced that language barrier, that social divide.
So speaking English basically marked you.
Definitely. It marked you as belonging to the conquered group, the subordinate class.
So if you were walking around England back then, it sounds like you'd hear a mix of languages, a pretty complex situation.
Oh, absolutely not monolingual. Not at all. It was fundamentally a trilingual reality, but the status of each language was worlds apart.
Okay, so what were the three?
You had French at the very top language of power, law, government, social climbing. Then Latin kept its role, mainly for the church, for scholarship, international stuff, high culture.
Right. Latin was always there for the church.
And then there was English. Mostly just the spoken language for the vast majority of people. The sources paint this picture where written English was actually in danger.
In danger of disappearing.
Potentially, yeah. With French and Latin dominating all the official and learned stuff, there was a real risk that written English, the language of Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon chronicle, it could have just faded away. The country's intellectual life, its administration was happening in other languages.
You can imagine English speakers feeling pretty cut off from power, from formal society. But even though English was demoted, it wasn't like it existed in a total bubble, right? People must have interacted.
And that's where it gets really interesting, linguistically speaking. French was the elite language, sure, but it wasn't totally walled off. People from all levels had to deal with each other, trade, service, just living nearby.
Yeah.
And knowing some French, or at least throwing in French words, became a way to get by in this new world, maybe to sound a bit fancier, or just to talk about new things the Normans brought in. It was maybe partly aspiration, partly just necessity.
And this wasn't just like a few words here and there. The sources seem to say it was huge.
Oh, massive. A flood. The scale of borrowing from French into English during this Middle English period is just staggering. Thousands and thousands of words. It fundamentally reshaped English vocabulary forever.
Yeah, the vocabulary change is probably the most obvious, the most lasting legacy. And what's really telling, like the sources point out, is which words got borrowed. They often reflect that initial power dynamic.
Ah, like the famous food example. Animals versus meat.
Exactly, that's the classic one. The sources show the animals, looked after by the English-speaking peasants, keep their Old English names. Swine, ox, sheep, calf, deer.
Right.
But when those animals end up cooked and served as meat on the tables of the French-speaking lords.
The words change.
Precisely. The names for the dishes come straight from French. Pork, beef, mutton, veal, venison. It's not just a fun fact. It's like a fossil record of the class divide embedded right there in the language. English speaker handles the animal, French speaker eats the meal.
That one example says so much about the whole hierarchy. And it wasn't just food, was it? Oh no, not at all. This pattern pops up everywhere the Normans took charge or reorganized things. Take government and law. Almost all the core words we use today are French.
Like what?
Well, government itself, administration, authority, sovereign, state, crown, realm, chancellor, treasurer, parliament, treaty, alliance, court, justice, judge, jury, evidence, verdict, plead, accuse, arrest, prison, property, estate, testament, heir. It's incredible. If you talk about the legal system or politics in English now, you're basically speaking medieval French.
That's kind of mind-blowing. What about the military? They were conquerors, after all.
Yeah, definitely. The military vocabulary got a huge dose of French. The sources list words like army, navy, peace, which is interesting, the opposite of the war. They brought enemy, arms, battle, combat, siege, defense, strategy, spy, captain, lieutenant, sergeant, soldier, male, meaning armor, joust, tourney, volley. It mirrors the Norman military setup, the feudal system.
And what about just, regular life?
Yeah.
Culture, religion?
It spread everywhere, especially into things linked with the richer, more refined lifestyle of the nobles or concepts they brought over. Religion, which was tied up with power, gave us words like miracle, sermon, canon, chaplain, cardinal, abbey, convent, clergy, parish.
Okay.
Daily life got terms for cooking, boil, fry, roast, grill, mince, braise, sauce, toast. Almost all cooking verbs are French. Household stuff like curtain, chair, cushion, table, mansion, chimney, fashion. Fashion, dress, garment, jewel, ornament, beauty, color, names of gems like sapphire, ruby. Even abstract ideas, art, painting, sculpture, literature, poetry, music, reason, logic, philosophy, courage, courtesy, gentle, noble. The sources really drive home that these loanwords covered pretty much all aspects of upper-class life and the abstract thinking introduced or pushed by the Normans.
So English speakers basically had to grab a whole new set of words to talk about these things. Or maybe older English words just got pushed out.
There's probably a mix. Sometimes a French word filled a gap, like maybe parliament was a new concept. But often a French word arrived and existed alongside an English one, creating synonyms.
Ah, and that's where the richness comes in.
Exactly. That layering you mentioned. You end up with the native English word, which might feel simpler, more direct, than the French loan word, often sounding a bit more formal or abstract, and sometimes even a Latin one on top of that, sounding the most formal or technical.
Like ask, question, interrogate.
Perfect example. Or think kingly, English, royal, French, regal, Latin. That layering totally changed what English could express.
It's amazing how that history created such depth in our vocabulary. But the sources mentioned it wasn't just words, right? French changed how English even sounded and worked.
Yeah, that's digging into the deeper linguistic stuff, beyond just nouns and verbs. Pronunciation changed, new sounds came in, like that oi and boy, or join mainly through French words.
Okay.
The difference between sounds like V and F or Z and S at the start of words became more fixed. In Old English, V and Z were often just variants, but French helped make words starting with V, like very, or Z, like zeal standard.
And spelling, too.
Even spelling conventions shifted a bit, influenced by French scribes, like using ow or ow for the U sound, think house, or C sometimes getting an S sound before E, I, or E, like in city. Those reflect French patterns.
And the grammar changed, too. The source said English became more analytic. What does that mean?
Yes, that's a big one. Old English was more synthetic, think German or Latin. Used lots of word endings, inflections, to show how words related in a sentence.
Right.
The whole Norman Conquest period pushed English faster towards being more analytic. That means relying more on word order and little function words, prepositions, articles like of or the to show meaning instead of complex endings. The disruption of having French spoken alongside English, maybe people simplifying things to communicate, it all played a part in moving away from those endings.
And you can still see traces of French grammar.
You can, in certain specific sort of fossilized phrases, as the sources point out.
You mean like when the adjective comes after the noun?
Exactly that. Think of Secretary General, Attorney General, Court Martial, body politic, sum total, letters patent. Normally in English, we'd say General Secretary, adjective first. But these specific formal or legal phrases, they keep the French word order. It's like a tiny grammatical footprint left over from centuries of French influence.
Okay, wow. So Norman Conquest brings in a new elite, pushes English down, leads to this huge borrowing, words, sounds, grammar. It really feels like raw power was the main reason French dominated for so long. But the sources hint there was something else going on, too.
Yeah, this is where the why it lasted gets really interesting. Sure, the initial dominance came from the conquest, but the sustained influence, why French stayed the prestige language for centuries, even among people who also spoke English, that points to something more than just military might.
The cultural angle.
Precisely. The sources really emphasize the perceived brilliance, the sophistication of French civilization at that time. France was seen as a cultural leader in medieval Europe. Its philosophy, art, literature, courtly manners, even its legal thinking.
Ah.
It was all seen as cutting edge, advanced, refined.
So it wasn't just forced on people. They actually admired it.
Absolutely. That cultural prestige acted like a magnet. English society back then was arguably seen as less developed in those areas, maybe even by some English people themselves. So French language and culture became incredibly attractive.
Right.
Borrowing wasn't just about necessity, it was also about admiration, wanting to seem sophisticated, wanting access to that culture. Speaking French, using French words, adopting French customs, it marked you not just as powerful, but as cultured. The sources even mention how later on, when Norman French in England started sounding different from French in France, the prestige actually shifted towards Parisian French, which had become the standard for literature and culture. That continuing influence, even after the Normans started using English more, really shows the power of cultural status in shaping language.
So the language of the conquerors became the language of cool, basically. Right. And that helps lock it in place for centuries.
Okay, we've covered a lot here. That huge shift after the Norman Conquest, English getting demoted, the language class link, the massive French impact on vocabulary, sound, grammar, and this key role of French cultural prestige.
It's quite the story for a language. And if we bring this back to you listening now, the big takeaway is that this whole period, French dominance, English as the common tongue, it didn't just happen and vanish. It fundamentally, permanently shaped the English language you use every single day.
That huge flood of French words is why English has such an enormous vocabulary, right? All those synonyms with slightly different flavors. Exactly. It gives the language this unique layered texture. And it's such a powerful historical example. It shows, maybe better than anything else, how a language's status isn't fixed. It's dynamic. It's tied up with politics, power, conquest, social structures, cultural pull. Language can be used to oppress, it can mark your class, it can be something people aspire to, all at the same time. This period really shows who called the shots on language in England for centuries, the elite, backed by both swords and sophisticated culture.
Powerful stuff indeed. And maybe something to think about, a final thought for you listening. Next time you're choosing your words, maybe between a simple English one and something that sounds a bit more formal, a bit more French. Just consider if you're hearing a faint echo of that medieval class divide. Do some words still feel like they have more status, even 1,000 years later?
It's a subtle legacy, definitely worth pondering.
It really is. And you know, that wasn't the end for English, not by a long shot. Make sure you tune in for our next deep dive. We'll be exploring 2 key moments when English bounced back from being the common tongue. You won't want to miss how this supposedly crude language started its incredible climb.